Sable Verithe was not supposed to be standing at this altar. The gown she wore belonged to a dead woman. The veil covering her face had been stitched for fingers that would never lift it. And the name the priest kept repeating, the one that echoed through the vast stone cathedral like a promise she had no right to make, was not hers. It was Neve's. Her twin sister had been dead for 6 days. 6 days of secret burials in unmarked graves, of forged letters claiming illness, of Sable learning to sign her sister's name until the loops matched perfectly. 6 days of becoming someone else because the alternative was watching her entire family destroyed. The Alpha King of Valdrin stood before her, his back straight, his ceremonial armor catching the candlelight like black water. Cardan Ashvale. She had heard stories about him since childhood. The youngest king to ever unite the northern Pax. The one who had ended the border wars with a single brutal campaign that left 3 rival alphas dead and their territories absorbed into his own. They called him the Winter Wolf, said his eyes could freeze a man's blood from across a battlefield. Those eyes were fixed on her now. Sable kept her gaze lowered, the way Neve always had, demure, obedient, the perfect political bride. Her pulse raced so violently she was certain he could hear it, certain every wolf in this cathedral could smell her terror beneath the perfumed oils the handmaidens had rubbed into her skin. The priest droned on about sacred bonds and the joining of 2 great houses. Sable heard none of it. She was too busy counting her breaths, willing her hands to stay still, reminding herself that if she failed now, her mother would be executed for breach of contract. Her younger brother would lose his position at court. Everything her father had built before his death would crumble. Neve had understood that. Neve had agreed to this marriage to save them all. And then Neve had died. The priest paused, and Sable realized with a jolt of panic that she had missed her cue. The cathedral had gone silent. 200 witnesses held their breath, waiting for the bride to speak her vows. She opened her mouth. I, Neve Verithe, daughter of House Verithe, do pledge myself. The Alpha King moved. It was subtle, barely perceptible. A single step closer, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his body, until his shadow fell across her face. His hand rose, and for one terrifying moment she thought he was going to rip the veil away, expose her in front of everyone. Instead, he leaned in. His lips brushed her ear through the delicate lace, his breath warm against her skin, and he spoke 2 words that stopped her heart completely. I know. Sable's knees nearly buckled. The world tilted, sounds becoming muffled, the candlelight blurring at the edges of her vision. He knew. He knew she wasn't Neve. He knew she was an imposter, a fraud, a woman committing treason against the crown by deceiving the Alpha King on his own wedding day. She waited for him to pull back, to denounce her, to call for the guards. He did none of those things. Instead, Cardan Ashvale straightened, his expression perfectly composed, and said in a voice that carried through the cathedral, "Continue." The priest stammered, confused by the interruption. "Your Majesty?" My bride was overcome with emotion. Cardan's tone was flat, brooking no argument. "She's recovered now. Continue the ceremony." Every instinct screamed at Sable to run, to confess, to do something other than stand frozen while the most dangerous alpha on the continent covered for her lie. But she couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except let the priest finish speaking, let Cardan slide a ring onto her trembling finger, let herself be pronounced the Alpha Queen of Valdrin. When he lifted her veil, his gray eyes met hers with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. Up close, he was devastating. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that seemed hewn from mountain stone, lips pressed into a line that could have been cruel or merely controlled, but it was his gaze that pinned her in place. Those pale winter eyes that saw straight through every layer of deception she had wrapped around herself. He kissed her, brief, formal, his lips barely grazing hers before pulling away. But when he drew back, his hand still cupping her jaw, he whispered again, so quiet only she could hear. "Tonight, little imposter, we talk." The cathedral erupted in cheers. Sable smiled the way Neve would have smiled, gracious and serene, while her mind raced with a single paralyzing question. If he had known all along, why had he let her go through with it? The night Neve died, it was raining. Sable remembered that detail with painful clarity. The way the water had streaked down the windows of their family's townhouse, blurring the street lamps into smears of gold. The way the thunder had masked the sound of hooves until the rider was already at their door, pounding with a desperation that made her mother drop the teacup she'd been holding. The message was brief. An accident on the mountain pass. The carriage carrying Neve to her final dress fitting before the wedding had lost a wheel, tumbled down an embankment. The body had been recovered, but barely recognizable. Sable had not believed it. Not at first. Neve was careful, methodical, the twin who planned everything down to the last detail. She didn't have accidents. She didn't make mistakes. She was supposed to marry the Alpha King in 7 days and secure their family's future forever. She wasn't supposed to die in a mudslide on a rain-slicked road. But the body they brought home wore Neve's ring, Neve's locket, Neve's dress, torn and stained with blood that had long since stopped flowing. Sable had held her sister's cold hand and felt something inside herself shatter. Their mother's wail had filled the house like a living thing, a sound Sable would hear in her nightmares for years to come. But beneath the grief, she had seen something else in her mother's eyes. Fear, raw, calculating terror. The contract, her mother had whispered, once the initial shock had faded. The marriage contract with King Carden. If Neve cannot fulfill it. Mother. Sable's voice had been hoarse. Neve just died. And if we cannot provide a bride, we die too. Her mother had gripped her shoulders, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. You don't understand. Your father signed that contract in blood. A Verith daughter will marry the Alpha King, or House Verith forfeits everything. Lands, titles, our lives. It's not just breach of promise, Sable. It's blood debt. Then we explain. We tell the king what happened. Surely he would grant an extension, find another arrangement. The king needs this marriage before the summit of Alphas. He's facing challenges from rival packs. Without a bonded queen at his side, his enemies will claim he's unfit to lead. Her mother's eyes had been wild. He won't grant anything. He'll take what's owed. The implication had settled over Sable like a shroud. You want me to take her place. You're identical. You know her mannerisms, her voice, and her habits. No one outside our household has met her in 3 years, not since she was promised to Valdrin and went into formal seclusion. The king himself has only seen her portrait. This is insane. This is survival. Sable had looked at her sister's body, at the face that mirrored her own, and felt the weight of an impossible choice crushing her chest. She could refuse. Let her family burn. Let her mother and brother pay the price for a contract her father had signed before she was old enough to understand. Or she could become a ghost, step into her sister's skin, and pray that no one ever discovered the deception. She had buried Neve in secret that night, in the garden beneath the willow tree where they had played as children. No funeral, no mourners, just Sable, her mother, and a grave that would never bear a name. By morning, Sable Verithe had ceased to exist. And Neve Verith had risen from the dead just long enough to marry a king. The bridal chambers were obscenely beautiful. Sable stood in the center of the room, taking in the massive 4-poster bed draped in silver silk, the fire crackling in a hearth large enough to roast a boar, the windows overlooking moonlit mountains that stretched toward the horizon like sleeping giants. Everything smelled of pine, and something darker, muskier. Him. She was alone. The handmaidens had undressed her, helped her into a nightgown of sheer white lace that left nothing to imagination, and departed with knowing smiles. They expected the Alpha King to claim his bride tonight, to complete the bond that would make her his queen in more than just name. Sable paced the room like a caged animal. He knew. He had whispered it at the altar, had let her feel the full weight of that knowledge before allowing the ceremony to continue. Which meant this entire marriage was a performance, a game she didn't understand, and she was walking into his territory without a single weapon. The door opened without warning. Carden entered like he owned the space, which, of course, he did. He had shed the ceremonial armor, now dressed simply in a black linen shirt and dark trousers that did nothing to diminish his presence. If anything, the casualness made him more dangerous, more real. He closed the door behind him. The lock clicked into place. "Leave the window," he said, before she could move. "You won't make it 3 steps before my guards catch you, and I'd hate to explain why my new bride was fleeing on her wedding night." Sable steadied herself. "I wasn't going to run." "No?" He moved toward the fire, pouring himself a drink from a crystal decanter. "You've been calculating escape routes since you walked in here." The window, the servants' passage behind the tapestry, the balcony that leads to the eastern tower. Your eyes keep moving. Force of habit. Survival instinct. He turned, glass in hand, studying her with those unnerving pale eyes. "It's one of the reasons I chose you." The words didn't make sense. Sable shook her head slowly. "You chose Neve. I chose a Verithe bride. The contract specified a daughter of your house, not a specific daughter." He took a sip. "When my sources reported that your sister died 6 days ago, I waited to see what your family would do, whether they would confess and beg for mercy, or whether they would attempt something more creative." Sable's blood turned to ice. "You knew before the ceremony." "I knew before you arrived in Valdrin." He set down the glass and approached her, moving with the deliberate grace of a predator who had no need to rush. "My spies are very thorough. I know that your sister's carriage lost a wheel because the axle was sabotaged. I know that the accident was arranged by someone who wanted this marriage to fail. And I know that you, Sable Veritha, buried your twin in an unmarked grave and took her place rather than let your family suffer the consequences." He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she could see the faint scars on his jaw, the silver threads in his dark hair. "You knew it was murder." Her voice came out strangled. "You knew, and you said nothing." "I said nothing because I needed you." His gaze held hers, unyielding. "I'm facing a coup, Sable. Corvin Blackmere, my chief advisor, is conspiring with the Ashford Pack to challenge my right to rule. The summit of Alphas is nearly upon us, and if I arrive without a bonded queen, they'll use it as proof that I'm unfit to hold the throne. They'll demand a trial by combat, and while I would win, the instability would tear Valdrin apart. So you let an imposter marry you. I let a survivor marry me." A glint of admiration crossed his features, gone before she could be certain. "Your sister was lovely, obedient, and completely unprepared for the vipers in my court. She would have been dead within a year. You," he tilted his head, assessing. "You buried her yourself, forged her handwriting, deceived 200 nobles and a high priest without flinching. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most desperate. Either way, you're exactly what I need." Sable's mind raced. "What are you proposing? A partnership? You play the role of my queen until the summit is over and my position is secured. In exchange, I'll help you find out who murdered your sister." His voice dropped lower. "Because, make no mistake, Sable, someone wanted her dead, and they're still out there. They may come for you next, once they realize the deception." "And the bond?" She gestured between them. "A marriage isn't complete without—" "The bond can wait." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I won't force that on you. Not until you choose it freely." "Why would I ever choose it?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he stepped closer. So close she could feel the heat of him, smell the winter pine and wood smoke that clung to his skin. "Because you feel it too," he said quietly. "That pull, that recognition. I felt it the moment you walked into the cathedral, and I've been trying to ignore it ever since." Sable's breath caught. She had felt something. A tug in her chest, a strange awareness that had nothing to do with fear. She had assumed it was adrenaline, terror, the madness of the moment. But the way he was looking at her now, like she was something rare and dangerous and utterly unexpected, We're strangers, she whispered. Yes. He reached up, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was light, barely there, but it sent a shiver cascading down her spine. But something tells me we won't be strangers for long. He stepped back abruptly, the moment broken. Get some sleep. Tomorrow you meet my court. And Sable? He paused at the door, glancing over his shoulder. Don't trust anyone. Not my advisors, not my guards, not the servants who smile too sweetly. Someone in this castle wanted your sister dead, and they might want me dead too. His smile was cold and sharp. That's what I'm counting on. When they come for you, we'll finally know who they are. The door closed behind him, and Sable sank onto the edge of the bed, her thoughts spiraling. She had expected exposure, punishment, death. Instead, she had found something far more dangerous. An alliance with a wolf who hunted his enemies with patience and precision, who had chosen her not despite her deception, but because of it. And somewhere in this castle, hidden among the smiling faces and bowing servants, was the person who had murdered her sister. Sable clenched her fists in the silk sheets. They had made one mistake. They had assumed that killing Neve would end the threat. They hadn't counted on Sable. Morning came too soon. Sable had barely slept, her mind churning through everything Carden had revealed. Murder, conspiracy, a coup brewing in the shadows. And somewhere in this castle, the person responsible for putting her sister in the ground. A knock at the door made her jolt upright. Your Majesty? A woman's voice, soft but firm. I'm Vesna, your lady-in-waiting. The king has requested you join him for breakfast with the council. Sable pressed a hand to her chest, steadying her breathing. This was it, her first test. She opened the door to find a woman, perhaps 10 years her senior, with sharp cheekbones and auburn hair pulled back in a severe braid. Vesna's eyes swept over Sable with professional efficiency, cataloging everything from her tangled hair to the shadows beneath her eyes. Rough night? Vesna asked, her tone carefully neutral. Unfamiliar bed. Of course. Vesna stepped inside, already moving toward the wardrobe. We have an hour to make you presentable. The council does not forgive weakness, and they will be watching you closely today. Why? Vesna paused, a gown of deep emerald draped over her arm. Because you are an unknown. The king chose you sight unseen, based on a contract signed before you were born. They expected him to reject you, demand a renegotiation. Instead, he married you within hours of your arrival. Her gaze met Sable's. They want to know what makes you special. Nothing, Sable thought bitterly. I'm not even the right sister, but she said none of that. Instead, she sat before the mirror and let Vesna work, transforming her from a sleepless fraud into something resembling a queen. The great hall was already full when she arrived. Long tables stretched the length of the room, laden with food that steamed in the morning light. Nobles clustered in groups, their conversations falling silent as Sable entered. She felt their stares like physical weight, dozens of eyes measuring, judging, and searching for cracks. Carden sat at the head table on a throne of carved obsidian. The seat beside him was empty. Hers. She walked toward it with her chin high, the way Neve would have, graceful, composed, every step a performance. When she reached the dais, Carden rose and extended his hand. The gesture was formal, expected, but his fingers closed around hers with a pressure that felt like a warning. Play your part. She took her seat. Breakfast commenced. The council members introduced themselves one by one. Lord Gavrel, Master of Coin, a portly man with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. Lady Marin, Commander of the Eastern Guard, who looked like she could snap Sable in half without breaking a sweat. High Priestess Orvain, ancient and watchful, her white robe stark against weathered brown skin. And then there was Corvin Blackmere. He sat at Carden's left hand, his position marking him as the king's closest advisor. He was handsome in a polished, deliberate way, silver-streaked dark hair, a perfectly trimmed beard, eyes the color of burnt copper. When he smiled at Sable, every instinct she possessed screamed danger. Your Majesty. Corvin inclined his head. What a pleasure to finally meet the woman who captured our king's heart. Your sister's letters spoke highly of you. A cold knot formed in Sable's stomach. Letters. Neve had written letters to the court. Of course, she had 3 years of correspondence while in formal seclusion, maintaining relationships, laying groundwork for her arrival. Letters that Sable had never seen. Lord Corvin. She kept her voice steady. I hope I can live up to whatever expectations my sister created. A subtle shift passed across his features. I'm sure you will. You seem different than I imagined. From the letters, I expected someone more. More what? Reserved. His smile widened. But perhaps the journey changed you. Travel has a way of revealing hidden depths. Carden's hand found her knee beneath the table, a subtle pressure that might have been reassurance or warning. My queen has had a long few days, he said smoothly. I'm sure she'll be happy to discuss her correspondence once she's settled. Corvin's gaze lingered on Sable a moment too long before he nodded and returned to his meal. But the damage was done. Someone in this room had exchanged letters with her sister for 3 years. Someone knew Neve's writing, her thoughts, and her personality. And if Sable couldn't find those letters, couldn't study them, couldn't learn what Neve had revealed, her deception would unravel before the week was out. The castle was a labyrinth. Over the following 2 days, Sable mapped its corridors in her mind, memorizing which hallways led to dead ends and which opened onto courtyards. She learned the servants' routes, the changing of the guards, the hidden passages that Vesna pretended didn't exist but couldn't quite hide from someone watching closely. She played her role well, attended dinners, smiled at nobles, accepted congratulations with appropriate modesty. At night, Carden would visit her chambers briefly, always maintaining the appearance of a devoted husband before retiring to his own rooms through the connecting door. They barely spoke, but she felt his presence constantly, his eyes tracking her across crowded rooms, his body positioning itself between her and potential threats she hadn't even identified yet. On the 3rd morning, she finally found what she was looking for. Neve's letters. They were hidden in a study adjacent to the Queen's chambers, locked in a rosewood box that Sable picked open with a hairpin. Her sister's handwriting stared up at her, painfully familiar, and for a moment grief threatened to swallow her whole. She pushed it down. There would be time to mourn later. The letters spanned 3 years. Dozens of them, organized by date, each one addressed to different members of court. Corvin Blackmere had received the most long, detailed letters discussing philosophy, poetry, the nature of duty. Neve had trusted him, confided in him, but it was the final letter that made Sable's breath stop. It was dated 1 week before Neve's death, and unlike the others, it had never been sent. The seal remained unbroken, the contents hidden, but the name on the front was not Corvin's. It was addressed to Carden himself. Sable broke the seal with trembling fingers. Your Majesty, I write this knowing it may never reach you. There are those in your court who do not wish this marriage to proceed, not because they oppose the alliance, but because they fear what I might tell you once I arrive. I have discovered something during my seclusion, something that implicates a member of your inner circle in crimes against the crown. I dare not commit the details to paper, but I must warn you. Trust no one who stands too close to your throne. I had hoped to speak with you in person, to place this evidence in your hands directly, but I fear I am being watched. If something should happen to me before the wedding, the letter ended there, unfinished. Neve must have been interrupted, must have hidden it quickly before she could complete her warning, before someone silenced her permanently. Sable's hands shook as she read the words again. Her sister hadn't been a passive political pawn. She had been investigating something, had uncovered a traitor in Carden's court, and she had died for it. Interesting reading? Sable spun around. Vesna stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. These are private correspondence. Sable's voice came out sharper than intended. Of course, Your Majesty. I merely came to inform you that Lord Corvin has requested an audience. He wishes to discuss wedding gifts. A chill ran down Sable's spine. Wedding gifts? He says he has something that belonged to your sister. Something she would have wanted you to have. A trap. Every instinct screamed it, but Sable folded the unfinished letter and slipped it into her bodice. Tell Lord Corvin I'll see him in the garden pavilion. Somewhere public. Vesna's lips curved slightly. A wise choice, Your Majesty. She left without another word, and Sable was struck by the sudden certainty that her lady-in-waiting knew far more than she was letting on. The garden pavilion was beautiful and exposed. Flowering vines climbed latticed walls that offered privacy from distant observers while allowing clear sightlines from the castle windows. Sable had chosen it deliberately, somewhere she could scream and be heard, somewhere Corvin couldn't act without witnesses. He arrived precisely on time, carrying a small velvet box. Your Majesty, he bowed with practiced elegance. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Your message mentioned my sister. Straight to business. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I appreciate that. Yes, your sister and I were close. During her years of seclusion, we corresponded frequently. I like to think we became friends. Sable's skin crawled. I didn't realize. Neve was private about her connections, but she trusted me, confided in me. He set the velvet box on the stone table between them. She sent this to me a month before the wedding. Asked me to give it to her after the ceremony, as a reminder of home. He opened the box. Inside lay a pendant, a silver crescent moon cradling a small opal that shifted colors in the light. Sable recognized it instantly. Their mother had given matching pendants to both twins on their 16th birthday. Neve had worn hers constantly. It had been around her neck when she died. Sable had buried it with her. Where did you get this? Her voice came out strangled. I told you. Neve sent it to me. That's impossible. Corvin's expression shifted, something predatory surfacing beneath the polished mask. Is it? You seem very certain about what your sister did and didn't do. Almost as if you knew her thoughts better than she shared them. The accusation hung in the air. Sable willed herself to breathe. We were twins. Of course I knew her. Twins. Corvin picked up the pendant, letting it swing gently from his fingers. Yes, I remember her mentioning that. A sister named Sable, I believe. The wild one. The unpredictable one. The one their mother worried would ruin everything. He was testing her. Probing for cracks. Our mother worried about many things. Indeed. He set the pendant back in the box and slid it toward her. Take it. A gift. In honor of your marriage. And perhaps, he leaned closer, lowering his voice, a reminder that I knew Neve very well. Well enough to notice if something seemed different. Sable's chest tightened. He knew. Or he suspected enough to be dangerous. Are you threatening me, Lord Corvin? Threatening the Queen? His laugh was soft, chilling. I would never. I'm merely offering my friendship, Your Majesty. In this court, you'll find few enough genuine allies. Best to recognize them when they present themselves. He straightened, resuming his mask of courtesy. The summit of alphas begins tomorrow. Rival packs will be watching your every move, searching for any sign that this marriage is less stable than it appears. I hope, for all our sakes, that they find nothing. He bowed and departed, leaving Sable alone with a pendant that should have been rotting in a grave, and the absolute certainty that Corvin Blackmere was either her sister's killer or knew exactly who was. She reached for the box with numb fingers. The pendant felt warm, almost alive, pulsing with a faint energy that made her palm tingle. When she turned it over, she found something that stopped her breath entirely. An inscription on the back. Tiny letters, freshly engraved. I know who you are. Sable didn't sleep that night. She sat in her chambers, the pendant clutched in her palm, its inscription burning into her mind like a brand. Someone had dug up her sister's grave. Someone had taken this from Neve's cold, dead body and delivered it as a message. I know who you are. The connecting door opened without warning. Carden entered, still dressed from some late meeting, shadows beneath his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept either. He took one look at her face and crossed the room in 3 strides. What happened? Sable handed him the pendant without a word. He turned it over, read the inscription, and his expression went absolutely lethal. For a moment, she glimpsed the Alpha King who had ended wars, the one who executed traitors without flinching. Corvin gave you this? He claimed Neve sent it to him. But I buried this with her, Carden. I clasped it around her neck myself before we covered the grave. He exhumed her body. The words came out low, dangerous. He violated her grave to send you a message. Or someone did it for him. Sable's voice cracked despite her efforts. She's been dead for barely 2 weeks, and they couldn't even let her rest. Carden set the pendant down carefully, as if restraining himself from crushing it. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled her into his arms. Sable went rigid with shock. This wasn't part of their arrangement, wasn't the cold political alliance they had agreed upon. But his arms tightened around her, one hand cradling the back of her head, and something inside her shattered. She cried. For the first time since finding Neve's broken body, she let herself truly grieve. The sobs tore through her, ugly and raw, and Carden held her through all of it. He didn't speak, didn't offer empty platitudes, just let her fall apart against his chest while the fire crackled and the night pressed against the windows. When the tears finally subsided, she pulled back, embarrassed. I'm sorry, that wasn't... Don't. His thumb brushed her cheek, wiping away the wetness. Don't apologize for mourning your sister. We barely know each other. Then, let's change that. He guided her to the chairs by the fire, settling across from her rather than leaving. Tell me about her. The real Neve, not the political bride in the letters. Sable hesitated, but something in his gaze, patient, genuinely curious, made her speak. She was braver than anyone knew. Everyone thought she was meek, obedient, but that was armor. She watched everything, learned everything. She could read a room in seconds, know exactly who was lying and who could be trusted. Her voice softened. She was supposed to be the one who saved us, the smart one, the careful one. I was just the spare. And yet you're the one who buried her in secret, stole her identity, and walked into a hostile court without flinching. Carden leaned forward. You're not a spare, Sable. You're a survivor. Surviving isn't the same as living. No, his eyes held hers. But it's the first step. The moment stretched between them, fragile and strange. Sable became acutely aware of his proximity, the firelight playing across his features, the way his gaze dropped briefly to her lips before snapping back up. The summit begins tomorrow, he said quietly, breaking the tension. Corvin will be watching for any sign of weakness. Whatever game he's playing, he's accelerating it. Then we accelerate too. Sable straightened, willing steel back into her spine. Neve discovered something about a traitor. Her unfinished letter mentioned evidence. If we can find it, we expose whoever killed her and neutralize the threat before the summit concludes. Carden nodded slowly. Where would she have hidden evidence? She was careful. Paranoid even. She wouldn't have trusted anyone here. Sable thought of her sister's habits, the way she tucked important things close. Her trunk, the one that had been sent ahead to the castle before her final journey. I haven't opened it yet. Then we open it tonight. They moved together through the darkened castle, navigating corridors with practiced stealth. The storage rooms lay in the lower levels, guarded by a single sleepy watchman who barely glanced at his king before letting them pass. Neve's trunk sat in a corner, covered in dust. Sable's hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside lay folded gowns, books, dried flowers pressed between pages of poetry. And beneath it all, hidden in a false bottom that Sable only found because she knew her sister's tricks, was a leather journal. She opened it to the last entry. I've confirmed my suspicions. Lord Corvin Blackmere has been embezzling crown funds for years, funneling gold to the Ashford pack in exchange for promises of power once they depose Carden. He knows I've discovered him. He's been having me followed. If something happens to me, This journal must reach the king. The proof is here: account ledgers, correspondence, names of every noble involved in the conspiracy. I should have been more careful, but I couldn't let them succeed. Carden deserves to know who his enemies are, even if I never get to tell him myself. Sable looked up, her vision blurring. She died protecting you. Carden took the journal, his jaw tight. And she succeeded. This is everything we need. But Corvin doesn't know we have it. No. A dangerous smile crossed his face. Which means we have something he doesn't expect. An advantage. What do we do with it? We wait. He closed the journal carefully. The summit brings all the major alphas under one roof. If we expose Corvin now, his allies scatter, deny involvement, claim ignorance. But if we let him make his move first, let him think he's winning. We catch everyone at once. Exactly. His hand found hers in the darkness, his grip warm and steady. Can you play the frightened bride for one more day? Let Corvin believe his threats are working? Sable thought of her sister's grave, desecrated for a cruel game. Thought of the pendant inscription, the smug satisfaction in Corvin's gaze. I can play whatever role you need. Good. Carden squeezed her hand once before releasing it. Because tomorrow we go hunting. The Great Hall had been transformed. Banners from 12 allied packs hung from the rafters, their colors creating a violent rainbow of territorial claims. Long tables groaned beneath platters of roasted meat and flagons of honeyed wine. And at the center of it all, raised on a dais, sat 2 thrones. Sable took her place beside Carden, her spine straight, her expression serene. She felt anything but serene. The rival alphas had arrived at dawn, 7 of them, each commanding territories that bordered Valdrin. She had memorized their names from Carden's briefings. Alpha Rennick of the Ashford pack, who laughed too loudly and watched her with hungry eyes. Alpha Usolda of the coastal wolves, whose cold beauty hid a reputation for ruthlessness. Alpha Brennick, Alpha Karsten, Alpha Mavis, Alpha Dorn, Alpha Kelrick. Any of them could be conspiring with Corvin. All of them were dangerous. You look pale, Your Majesty. Corvin appeared at her elbow, his smile sharp as broken glass. Are the festivities overwhelming? Simply taking everything in, Lord Corvin. Of course. His gaze swept the hall before returning to her. I trust you received my gift? The pendant? Yes. She touched her throat, where the crescent moon now hung. A calculated risk, wearing the evidence of his threat. It was unexpected. Your sister treasured it. I thought you might feel closer to her, having it near. I feel many things having it near. Satisfaction glinted in those burnt copper depths. The summit brings great opportunities, Your Majesty. Alliances formed, old grudges settled. One never knows how dramatically things might shift. Are you expecting shifts, Lord Corvin? I'm expecting the natural order to assert itself. He bowed, low and mocking. Enjoy the feast. He melted into the crowd, and Sable felt Carden's hand brush the small of her back. He's confident, Carden murmured without looking at her. He thinks he's won. Good. Confident men make mistakes. Speaking from experience? Speaking from watching powerful men underestimate everyone around them. She turned slightly, meeting his eyes. They always forget that the people they dismiss are the ones paying attention. Warmth crossed Carden's expression. You're remarkable. I'm furious. There's a difference. In my experience, the best people are both. The feast progressed with agonizing slowness. Sable smiled until her face ached, made polite conversation with alphas who assessed her like livestock, and pretended not to notice the whispered exchanges between Corvin and Alpha Rennick of Ashford. But she noticed everything. The subtle hand signals, the meaningful glances toward the eastern doors, the way certain guards had positioned themselves at strategic exits. Something was happening tonight. Carden. She leaned close under the pretense of adjusting his collar. The eastern corridor. Corvin's men are gathered there. I see them. His voice was barely audible. They're waiting for something. Or someone. The doors burst open. A bloodied messenger staggered into the hall, collapsing before the dais with a cry that silenced every conversation. "Your Majesty!" The man's voice was ragged with terror. "Attack the northern border, Ashford forces." Chaos erupted. Alphas shouted, demanding explanations. Guards drew weapons. And through it all, Sable watched Corvin's face, the flash of triumph he couldn't quite hide, before arranging his features into appropriate shock. This was it, the distraction. "Carden," she gripped his arm. "It's a trap. They want you to leave." His eyes met hers, and she saw that he'd reached the same conclusion. "Stay here." His voice brooked no argument. "Whatever happens, stay in this hall. What are you going to do?" His smile was cold and sharp. "Spring the trap." Carden left with half the guards, supposedly to address the northern crisis. In reality, Sable knew, he was circling back through the hidden passages, positioning loyal soldiers at every exit. The journal evidence had been distributed to trusted witnesses. Whatever Corvin planned, they were ready. But Corvin wasn't stupid. Sable felt the shift in the room before she saw it, a subtle movement of bodies, guests drifting away from her, guards exchanging positions. Vesna appeared at her side, her face tense. "Your Majesty, we should move to a more secure location." "Not yet, my lady. I said not yet." Sable's eyes scanned the crowd, searching for Corvin. "If I run now, he'll know something's wrong." "He already knows." Vesna's hand closed on her wrist. "Please, Your Majesty. Your sister trusted me. Let me protect you the way I couldn't protect her." Sable went cold. "You knew Neve?" "I served as her correspondent here at court. I was the one who relayed her letters, who warned her about Corvin's suspicions." Vesna's voice cracked. "I begged her to stop investigating, to just marry the king and stay safe. But she refused. She said some things were worth dying for. Why didn't you tell me? I wasn't certain you could be trusted. For all I knew, you were part of Corvin's plan, a replacement bride he could control." Vesna met her eyes. "But you're not, are you? You're here for the same reason Neve was, to protect Carden." Before Sable could respond, the torches flickered. The great hall plunged into shadow as dozens of flames extinguished at once. Screams erupted. Bodies collided in the darkness. And through it all, Sable felt someone grab her arm, dragging her away from the dais. She fought. Elbows, nails, teeth, every dirty trick she'd learned surviving on her own. Her captor grunted in pain as she connected with something soft, but his grip didn't loosen. "Stop fighting, Your Majesty." Corvin's voice in her ear, his breath hot against her neck. "This will go much easier if you cooperate. You killed my sister." "Your sister was a complication. You're an opportunity." He yanked her through a side door, into a corridor lit by a single guttering torch. "The king will be found dead in his chambers, killed by a desperate imposter queen who couldn't bear the weight of her deception. The Ashford pack will restore order, and I will be rewarded for my years of loyal service." "You're insane." "I'm practical." He shoved her against the wall, one hand closing around her throat. "Your sister thought she was clever, uncovering my arrangements. She was going to ruin everything. So I removed her. Just as I'll remove you once you've served your purpose." "And what purpose is that?" "Witness." His smile was grotesque in the flickering light. "When they find the king's body, they'll find you standing over it, blade in hand. The grieving court will demand justice. I'll reluctantly order your execution, and any loose ends from your sister's investigation will be buried with you." Sable's vision spotted from lack of air. But even as darkness crept in, her fingers found the pendant at her throat, the one he'd taken from Neve's grave, the one that proved he'd been there. "You made a mistake," she gasped. "I don't make mistakes." "You do." She smiled despite the hand crushing her windpipe. "You gave me evidence." Confusion crossed his face, and in that moment of hesitation, Sable drove her knee upward with every ounce of strength she possessed. Corvin doubled over, his grip loosening. Sable tore free, sprinting down the corridor without looking back. She could hear him behind her, cursing, recovering. The connecting hallways blurred past. She needed to find Carden, needed to reach the great hall, needed. A door swung open ahead. Lady Marin stepped out, sword drawn. And for one terrible moment, Sable thought she was part of the conspiracy. Then Marin's blade swept past her, catching Corvin as he lunged. Steel met steel. The clash was deafening. "Get to the hall!" Marin shouted, driving Corvin back. "The king needs you!" Sable ran. The great hall was a battlefield. Torches had been relit, revealing the carnage: overturned tables, scattered food. Guests pressed against the walls, while Carden's guards clashed with Ashford's soldiers. At the center of it all, Carden fought like the stories claimed, a whirlwind of lethal precision cutting through anyone who opposed him. Alpha Rennick of Ashford circled him, sword raised. "You can't win this, Carden. Half your council is mine. Your own advisor betrayed you." "My advisor will hang." Carden's blade opened a gash across Rennick's arm. "And so will you." Sable skirted the edges of the battle, searching for an opening. She was no warrior, couldn't match swords with trained soldiers. But she could do something else. She could tell the truth. "Stop!" Her voice rang across the hall, sharper than she'd known herself capable. "All of you, stop!" Somehow, improbably, the fighting paused. Every eye turned toward her, the battered queen with a bruised throat and wild eyes. "Lord Corvin Blackmere conspired with the Ashford pack to overthrow your king." She pulled Neve's journal from where she'd hidden it inside her bodice. "I have proof." Account records, correspondence, names of every traitor involved. "This was found in my sister's belongings, the sister Corvin murdered to keep silent." Murmurs swept the hall. "She's lying." Corvin stumbled through a side door, Marin's blade still pressed against his back. "She's an imposter. That's not the woman the king married. She's not even the right sister." "You're right." Sable's voice didn't waver. "I'm not Neve. I'm Sable Veritha, her twin. I took her place because Corvin killed her to protect his conspiracy." He thought he was eliminating a threat. She lifted her chin. "He created a worse one." Silence fell, then Carden laughed. It was a dark sound, filled with grim satisfaction. He crossed the hall, stepping over groaning bodies, until he stood before Sable. His hand cupped her face, tilting it up to meet his gaze. "I knew," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I knew from the moment she arrived. I married her anyway, not because I needed a political bride, but because I saw what she was willing to sacrifice for the people she loved." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "That's worth more than any contract." "This is madness." Corvin struggled against Marin's grip. "You'd choose a fraud over your own counsel? I'd choose her over everything." Carden turned, his voice dropping to ice. "Take him. Take Rennick. Take every traitor whose name appears in that journal. The executions will be public, so no one ever forgets what happens to those who betray Valdren." Guards moved efficiently, binding the conspirators. The rival alphas watched in stunned silence as their fellow leaders were dragged away in chains. Sable's legs gave out. Carden caught her before she hit the ground, sweeping her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He carried her from the hall, away from the blood and chaos, to a quiet antechamber where the sounds of aftermath faded to murmurs. He set her down on a velvet couch, then knelt before her. "It's over." "Is it?" Her voice shook. "Your court knows I'm a fraud. Your enemies know I deceived everyone. How can you possibly—" "You saved my kingdom." He took her hands, his grip warm and steady. "You avenged your sister. You stood in that hall and told the truth when lies would have been easier." His eyes searched hers. "Sable, I don't want the woman your sister pretended to be. I want you. The real you. The one who fights and grieves and refuses to break. You barely know me, then let me learn." He brought her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Not as a political arrangement, not as a contract, just two people who survived something terrible, choosing to survive together. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "What about the bond? The mate bond you mentioned? I feel it. I've felt it since the altar. His voice roughened. But I won't trap you with it. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, the choice is yours. She looked at him, this fierce, terrifying, impossibly gentle man who had held her while she wept and fought beside her without hesitation. Ask me, she whispered. Ask you what? To stay. Ask me properly. Fire blazed in his gray eyes. Sable Veritha, will you stay? Not as a replacement for your sister, not as a political pawn, but as yourself, as my partner, as my queen, in truth. She kissed him. He made a rough sound against her mouth, his hands sliding into her hair, pulling her closer. The kiss was nothing like the formal brush at their wedding. This was desperate, hungry, and full of everything they hadn't allowed themselves to feel. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. Is that a yes? That's an absolutely. The executions were held 3 days later. Sable didn't attend, and Carden didn't ask her to. Some justice needed to be witnessed, other justice simply needed to be done. She watched from her window as the crowds gathered, heard the distant roar when the sentences were carried out, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Neve could rest now. The following weeks brought changes she hadn't anticipated. The rival alphas, shaken by the conspiracy's exposure, renewed their pledges of loyalty with unprecedented sincerity. Lord Gavrel and Lady Marin stepped into the council vacuum, bringing competence and genuine dedication. And the court, rather than rejecting Sable for her deception, seemed to embrace her for it. You're one of us now, Vesna said, helping her dress for the formal bonding ceremony. You fought for Valdrin. You bled for it. That matters more than which name you were born with. Does it? Look around you. Vesna gestured to the window, where crowds had gathered to celebrate. They're not here for Neve Verithe, political bride. They're here for Sable Verithe, the woman who exposed a conspiracy and saved their king. Sable turned to the mirror. The woman staring back wore a gown of deepest blue, silver thread catching the light like stars. Her mother's comb held her hair in place. Her sister's pendant lay against her heart. She was not replacing Neve anymore. She was herself, finally and completely. Are you ready? Vesna asked softly. Sable took a breath. Yes. The bonding ceremony took place under a full moon. The entire court had gathered in the castle's central courtyard, torches casting warm light against ancient stone. Carden waited at the altar, dressed in ceremonial black, his eyes finding hers the moment she appeared. He smiled. Not the cold, political smile she'd seen at their first wedding. This was something raw and real, transforming his severe features into something breathtaking. Sable walked toward him alone. No father to give her away, no pretense of tradition, just a woman choosing her future with every step. When she reached him, he took her hands. I, Carden Ashvale, Alpha King of Valdrin, claim you as my mate. His voice carried across the courtyard. Not by contract, not by obligation, by choice. I choose your strength. I choose your fire. I choose every part of you, even the parts you think are broken. Sable's throat tightened. I, Sable Verithe, accept your claim. She squeezed his hands. I choose your patience. I choose your protection. I choose the man who saw through every lie and wanted me anyway. The high priestess stepped forward, binding their hands with silver cord. What begins in choice, let it continue in trust. What is spoken in moonlight, let it endure in daylight. 2 souls, 1 bond, unbroken. Carden leaned down and kissed her as the crowd erupted in cheers. It was soft at first, reverent, but quickly deepened into something that promised later, and more, and forever. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. Hello, wife. Hello, husband. She laughed, breathless. The real one this time. The only one. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I love you, Sable. I don't know when it happened somewhere between the altar and watching you face down Corvin with nothing but fury and a pendant, but it's true. I love you too. The words came easier than she expected. I think I started falling when you held me while I cried. Nobody had ever. I know. He kissed her forehead. I know. The celebration lasted until dawn. There was dancing and feasting and toasts that grew increasingly bawdy as the wine flowed. Neve would have loved it, Sable thought. Would have delighted in watching her sister finally find happiness. Later, much later, in their chambers, Carden traced lazy patterns on her shoulder, while moonlight spilled across the bed. Tell me something, he murmured. Anything. What were you thinking, that moment at the altar, when I whispered that I knew? Sable considered. Terror, mostly. I thought you were going to expose me, have me executed on the spot. And now? Now I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me. She shifted, propping herself up to look at him. You could have destroyed me with those 2 words. Instead, you offered me a partnership, a chance. Everything that came after finding Neve's journal, exposing Corvin, falling in love with you, it all started because you chose to say, I know, instead of guards. He pulled her down for a kiss. I almost didn't. I almost let you go through the whole ceremony without saying anything, just to see how far you'd take it. Why didn't you? Because you looked terrified. His hand cupped her face, and something in me couldn't bear to see you afraid alone. She thought about that, about the strange alchemy of chance and choice that had brought them here. A dead sister, a desperate deception, a whispered secret that became the foundation of something real. Neve would have liked you, she said quietly. You think so? She loved fiercely, just like you. She would have seen past the fearsome reputation to the man underneath. Sable smiled. She would have been glad I found you. Carden kissed her palm. I'm glad you found me too. They fell asleep tangled together, the bond humming between them like a second heartbeat. Outside, the celebrations continued, but here in their chambers, there was only peace. Sable had walked into that cathedral expecting to die, wearing a dead woman's dress and a dead woman's name. She had stood at the altar prepared to sacrifice everything for a family that needed saving. Instead, she had found a king who saw her clearly. A home that wanted her as she was. A love that began with 2 whispered words and grew into something unshakable. I know. He had known she was a fraud, known she was desperate, terrified, and imperfect. And he had chosen her anyway. That, Sable thought as sleep claimed her, was the only fairy tale that mattered.